Something very strange is happening behind the scenes, and it involves the world's most powerful institutions, trillions of dollars in tokenized assets, and two crypto assets everyone thought were dead in the water, XRP and XLM. While retail investors chase memecoins and hype, BlackRock, the Fed, and global payment rails are quietly positioning themselves around these two ISO 20022 compliant assets like it's a geopolitical chess game. And if you think this is just a coincidence, think again. Because once this switch flips, the entire financial system won't just run on crypto, it'll run on a select few assets. And the elites know exactly which ones. Subscribe to Be Crypto Smart if you want to be 10 steps ahead of the narrative, because we're diving headfirst into what may be the greatest financial realignment in modern history. Let's start with BlackRock, because this is where it gets wild. And if you think this is just another investment firm dipping its toes into crypto, you're dead wrong. BlackRock isn't investing. They're infiltrating. Let's break this down. According to a growing number of insider researchers, XRP and XLM are already on BlackRock's radar. Not as assets to trade, but as the actual foundation for a new financial operating system. We're talking deep custodial positioning, over-the-counter accumulation, and infrastructure-level exposure via companies most retail investors have never even heard of. Names like Octo, ONDO Finance, Securitize, and tokenized treasuries keep surfacing. But these aren't random projects. They're part of a coordinated architecture that points to one thing: BlackRock is front-running the future. Let's be blunt. They're not waiting for ETFs to be approved. They're not gambling on pump cycles. They're not watching YouTube price predictions. They're embedding themselves in the very rails that future money will move through. And the public? They're still distracted by Dogecoin. This is not about speculative profits anymore. That era is ending. This is about owning the monetary infrastructure of a post-legacy banking system, where the plumbing is no longer Swift and Shaps, but XRP Ledger and Stellar-based rails. Because here's the brutal truth most people still haven't realized. The endgame isn't Bitcoin. The endgame is tokenized everything. Tokenized treasuries, tokenized real estate, tokenized equities, tokenized CBDCs, and yes, even tokenized carbon credits. And guess what that tokenized economy needs? Fast, final, scalable, compliant, interoperable, bridge-ready protocols. That rules out Ethereum, that rules out Solana, that rules out 99% of layer ones. But it doesn't rule out XRP and XLM. In fact, it points directly to them. These protocols weren't designed for speculation, they were designed for movement. XRP and XLM aren't meme tokens. They're the underlying software of future payment systems, built to handle trillions in daily volume without breaking. And BlackRock, they're not missing this. They're moving quietly and surgically into these ecosystems before the narrative goes mainstream. Let's get specific. BlackRock's digital asset division has been working hand-in-glove with JP Morgan's Onyx, which is already exploring wholesale CBDCs, tokenized treasuries, and cross-border settlement pilots. Guess who also operates in that space? RippleNet, State Street, BNY Mellon, and Citibank are all developing digital custody and tokenized fund issuance tools. And every one of them is building infrastructure that interoperates with ISO 20022 compliant rails. That means XRP and XLM are protocol-ready. Then there's ONDO Finance, a tokenized treasury protocol that quietly partners with BlackRock and issues real-world assets on-chain. Guess what they're experimenting with under the hood? Yup, bridging tokenized debt through cross-chain rails, with hints of XRPL compatibility. But here's where it gets truly crazy. There's a theory gaining traction, and it's not as far-fetched as it sounds, that BlackRock already has indirect holdings of XRP and XLM through a layered network of private custodians, OTC desks, and infrastructure partners. They're not holding it in their ETF yet because that would make headlines. Instead, they're likely stockpiling and locking up liquidity behind the scenes, preparing to tokenize funds, equities, treasuries, and CBDCs, all interoperable with publicly viewable permissioned rails. In simple terms, they're not betting on XRP or XLM pumping. They're embedding XRP and XLM into systems where the money must flow. And once trillions are flowing through these rails, it's not about price anymore. It's about network effect, liquidity dominance, settlement finality. Want more proof? Let's talk about Rust, the Ripple stablecoin. It just launched on the XRP ledger, positioned as a regulated USD-backed bridge asset that could easily plug into stablecoin liquidity, tokenized debt, and global FX markets. Now combine that with BlackRock's multi-trillion-dollar asset management scale and their laser focus on tokenized fixed-income markets. That's not random. That's a pipeline in the making. And what about Stellar? MoneyGram's global cash-to-crypto rails are powered by XLM. They just rolled out stablecoin ramps across 180-plus countries. But here's the part they don't tell you. BlackRock is a top stakeholder in Western Union, which is directly threatened by Stellar's real-time payments model. So what does a power player like BlackRock do? They don't fight innovation. They fund it. They co-opt it. They swallow it whole, which leads to the next logical step, positioning themselves inside Stellar's growth. Not on a public list of validators, not on an exchange leaderboard, but buried inside VC funds, infrastructure partners, custody rails, and programmatic liquidity providers. You'll never see BlackRock buys XLM on a headline, but you will see their fingerprints all over the payment rails that XLM powers. Let me spell it out. They're not looking for profit, they're looking for control. They're not trading crypto, they're designing digital monetary architecture. They're not speculating on tokens. They're embedding rails into the operating system of global finance. XRP and XLM are the only two public chain assets currently being tested in high-level financial infrastructure pilots, while also maintaining the speed, compliance potential, and interoperability required for tokenized sovereign assets. And BlackRock isn't just watching this happen. They're quietly building on top of it. And by the time retail realizes what's going on, these assets will already be locked up, staked in custody, or swallowed into tokenized mutual funds, completely inaccessible to the average investor except at much, much higher valuations. So when you hear BlackRock talk about tokenized treasuries or digital bonds, know this, they're not talking about theory. They're building a new system of money, and XRP and XLM are already inside the machine. Let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture, because most people still have no idea what's coming. Forget meme coins. Forget pump-and-dump NFTs. Forget speculative Layer 1 hype. The real future of crypto isn't about coins. It's about infrastructure. And the CEO of the world's largest asset manager, Larry Fink of BlackRock, just gave away the game plan. In a candid interview, he said, "The next generation for markets, the next generation for securities, will be the tokenization of securities." He didn't say Bitcoin. He didn't say Ethereum. He didn't say DeFi protocols. He said tokenized securities. That includes tokenized U.S. treasuries, tokenized real estate portfolios, tokenized mutual funds, tokenized carbon credits, tokenized currencies, tokenized equity shares, even tokenized gold. This isn't some fringe idea anymore. It's already a top priority for the biggest money managers on Earth. BlackRock, JP Morgan, Citi, BNY Mellon, and State Street aren't betting on altcoins. They're rebuilding the financial markets on blockchain rails. But here's the kicker. You can't tokenize $900 trillion in real-world assets on Ethereum. Gas fees are too high. Throughput is too low. Finality takes too long. Compliance isn't native. That eliminates Ethereum and Solana right off the bat. So what's left? XRP Ledger and Stellar. Period. These aren't just fast, they're battle-tested, compliant-ready, and built from the ground up to serve as institutional-grade value transfer layers. They weren't designed for NFT JPGs. They were engineered for sovereign-grade settlement. Let's get real for a moment. Ripple is already piloting tokenized land titles with the Colombian government, using the XRP ledger to digitally track ownership and verify real estate documentation on-chain. That's not theory, that's real-world adoption. Stellar has partnered with Franklin Templeton, one of the largest asset managers in the world, to tokenize money market funds. This isn't a crypto startup. They manage over $1.5 trillion in traditional finance assets. And what rails are they using? Stellar, XLM. Not because it's trendy, because it's compliant, efficient, and interoperable with the existing financial system. And it goes deeper. Ripple recently launched Rust, a USD-backed stablecoin issued natively on the XRP ledger, intended not just for crypto payments, but as a bridge asset between CBDCs, tokenized treasuries, and international FX corridors. Palau is already piloting their national digital currency on top of XRP Ledger. Not Ethereum, not Algorand, XRP. Why? Because XRP Ledger supports trust lines, native multi-asset support, instant finality, and no slippage. That's everything central banks need for a real CBDC pilot, and none of the congestion that Ethereum faces. So let's call this what it is: the greatest infrastructure shift in capital markets since the creation of the Internet. And XRP and XLM are at the center of the digital monetary stack. Everyone's talking about Ethereum ETFs, but that's just a distraction. Because behind the scenes, what the elites are really building is a world where every asset is tokenized, every transaction settles in seconds, and every piece of value flows through a few chosen protocols. And here's the part most people still can't see. That future is already happening. While influencers hype up Layer 2 ZK EVMs and 1000x gaming coins, Ripple and Stellar are cutting deals with governments, central banks, major financial institutions, NGOs, and even the United Nations. This isn't crypto adoption. This is monetary system integration. Let's dig deeper into why XRP and XLM are so perfectly positioned. They're both ISO 20022 compliant, meaning they speak the same data language as central banks and SWIFT systems. They both settle in 2 to 5 seconds with finality. They both support native assets, multi-currency paths, and built-in compliance tools like memo fields for KYC and AML requirements. They're open source, auditable, and scalable, unlike most private blockchains that central banks experiment with. This makes them not just viable options, but the most logical choice for a tokenized global settlement layer. Now, let's talk about what's actually being tokenized right now in real time. U.S. Treasuries, platforms like Ondo Finance and MatrixDoc are issuing tokenized bonds at scale, and regulators are watching. Who's laying the infrastructure? Partners with Ripple connections. Money market funds, Franklin Templeton and WisdomTree are already running tokenized fund pilots on Stellar and public chains. Cross-border payments, Stellar plus MoneyGram are onboarding millions through USDC, which connects directly into Stellar DEXs. Real estate, Proppy, Ripple pilots, and government registries are experimenting with land ownership tokenization via XRPL. Digital aid, UNHCR, World Bank, and IMF are working with Stellar to disperse humanitarian aid using XLM rails, especially in places like Ukraine and Kenya. And this is just the beginning. Every asset class, every financial instrument, every settlement rail is being rebuilt from scratch. But here's what they're not telling you. Only a handful of protocols are being integrated, and XRP and XLM are 2 of them. So let's ask the obvious question. Why isn't this front-page news? Why isn't the entire world talking about the fact that a small number of blockchains are being embedded into government systems and capital markets? Because the elites aren't ready for retail to front-run them. If this narrative catches fire too early, before liquidity is locked, before custody is established, before the tokenized pipelines go live, they risk losing control. So instead, they let the noise take over, distract with AI hype cycles, distract with memecoin mania, distract with Ethereum versus Solana debates. Meanwhile, they're laying the foundation for a $900 trillion tokenized economy on the backs of XRP Ledger and Stellar. This isn't just theory anymore. This is the future of money being written in real time, and unless you're looking in the right direction, you'll miss it. BlackRock knows. The IMF knows. The WEF knows. But they're not going to tell you directly. Because once tokenization flips from pilot stage to full-scale deployment, it's game over for anyone not already positioned. And here's the truth they don't want you to realize until it's too late. XRP and XLM aren't just part of the new system, they are the system. So ask yourself, will you be chasing the next hype pump? Or will you be front-running the largest capital shift in human history? Because in the tokenized future, value won't be just stored. It'll move. Instantly, seamlessly, globally. And when it moves, it's going to move through XRP and XLM. The XRP controlled opposition theory. There's a theory that XRP was never meant to be a retail play. Some say Ripple was planted, or at the very least co-opted, by legacy institutions to roll out a centralized form of programmable money under the guise of decentralization. It makes sense when you look at Ripple's ties. Former Treasury officials, partnerships with Bank of America, Santander, and the Bank of England, friendly relationships with the IMF and World Economic Forum. What crypto project do you know that gets welcomed into central banking discussions? The elite don't fear Ripple, they endorse it. But here's the kicker. If Ripple and XRP are part of the controlled rollout, then XLM and the Stellar Foundation might be their counterbalance. Stellar has taken a more NGO approach, partnering with the UNHCR, handling cross-border aid, and building open-source wallets for developing economies. So here's the thesis. XRP is for institutions. XLM is for the people. Both operate within ISO 20022 frameworks. Both have ties to the digital dollar and digital euro discussions. And both are being strategically placed for the tokenized future. XLM, the sleeper coin the elite won't admit they need. If XRP is the bulldozer clearing the regulatory path, XLM is the stealth drone flying under the radar. Stellar was created as a fork of the XRP ledger, but with different values. Less corporate, more humanitarian. But here's what's overlooked. XLM powers MoneyGram's USDC ramps in over 180 countries. XLM supports Soroban smart contracts, making it programmable and DeFi-ready. XLM is integrated with global aid payments, including Ukraine relief via the UN. Why would the United Nations choose Stellar? Because it's compliant, fast, transparent, and designed for financial inclusion. Everything the elite say they want their CBDCs to be. And here's the twist. CBDCs may never reach global adoption if people don't trust them. But if they're built on top of Stellar or XRP's public ledgers, they gain both legitimacy and interoperability. That's the quiet bet the elite are making. You won't hear BlackRock or the Fed say, "We love XLM," but they'll build payment rails that depend on it. The regulatory smokescreen is intentional. You might ask, if XRP and XLM are so critical, why all the lawsuits and regulatory attacks? Simple. To shake retail out before the system goes live. The SEC's case against Ripple wasn't about protecting investors. It was about stalling adoption long enough for legacy finance to catch up and quietly enter the market. Look at what happened. Ripple won key court victories. The SEC was forced to admit XRP is not a security when sold on exchanges. XRP relisted on major platforms. Institutions started circling back. This wasn't a loss for Ripple, it was a setup for institutional clearance. And Stellar? It's avoided lawsuits entirely. Why? Because it's too useful to global aid and financial inclusion to be attacked directly. They're playing both sides of the chessboard. ETF bait and switch. What comes after Bitcoin? Everyone's distracted by Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. But here's the problem. BTC and ETH aren't made for real-world asset tokenization. You can't run trillions of daily settlement volume through slow, congested L1s. That's where XRP and XLM come in. Think of this timeline. Spot BTC ETF approved. ETH ETF imminent. Next up, multi-asset ETF with XRP, XLM, HBAR, ALGO, the regulatory green list assets. Top analysts are already speculating that a combo ETF with real utility coins is coming. Because once tokenization of real-world assets becomes the norm, fund managers will need coins that move value, not just store it. You don't use gold, BTC, to settle payments between banks. You use XRP or XLM. BlackRock knows this. That's why they're building infrastructure around tokenization, not just exposure to crypto. They're skipping the speculation phase. XRP, XLM, and the final boss, global liquidity reset. If you've heard about the BRICS gold-backed currency, Project Enbridge, or the digital euro, then you know we're heading toward a massive reset of global liquidity systems. And whether the new system is run by CBDCs on private blockchains, stablecoins like USDC or LUST, tokenized sovereign debt, they all need interoperability.